because if you think of your behavior, it exists at two different levels. It's either your conscious behavior, so something that you are voluntarily, consciously thinking about doing, or your subconscious behavior, things that are happening without your awareness or consciousness.
Yeah.
And typically 90% of our behavior is done at the level of our unconscious. Basically, your identity is your belief system. It's what you have grown up knowing the world to be like. It's the way that you're comfortable interacting with the things that are around you in the world. The reason that it's important to gain an awareness on what your identity is because of that subconscious process we were talking about previously. If you hold a certain identity, then you are predispositioned to act in a way that's in alignment with that identity. So you have your previous identity, which creates that unconscious behavior. Now, if you choose to do a different behavior, you then are seeding a new identity. So when it comes to taking conscious action, so the specific thing that you want to do that you know is fueling a new identity, when it comes to doing that thing, you need to do it as consistently, reliably, and effectively as possible.
This episode is brought to you by Venture Mastery, a platform bringing you the best talent from the entrepreneurial world. The platform which connects successful entrepreneurs to other business owners aiming to achieve success. If you've ever wanted to get more leads, more customers, and more revenue, if you ever wondered what successful business owners do differently, what strategies do they follow? How do they apply and execute? If you ever wondered how other entrepreneurs manage to scale their businesses, then you're in the right place. Our mission is to become one of the best educational resources for entrepreneurs who have tried and failed continuously. Anyone can build a business, but only 1% can master it, grow, scale, and prosper. We help you get into that 1% with proven methods used by seven-figure entrepreneurs from all around the world. We will cover all aspects of running a business successfully from a practical standpoint, covering everything you need to know about money and finance, leadership, sales, marketing, wealth management, mindset, and how to get you motivated day by day. So if you'd like to find out more about our programs, keep up to date with our upcoming online courses and one-to-one interviews, please follow us on either Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or other social media platforms of your choice at Venture Mastery, or check us out online at www.venturemastery.co.
Okay, thank you for accepting my invitation to my video podcast. I created a short introductory about you, but very shortly. As I understand, you are the co-founder of Company for Purpose. This is a social impact platform. And you are also a host of the Self-Improvement Daily podcast.
Right.
I checked actually your website, which looks very, very, very great.
Thank you.
I really like that.
Thank you.
You have some purpose like making the world a better place, and you were also a TEDx speaker, as I understand.
That's correct.
And a marketer at a startup where you are developing a device, a rehabilitation device, as long as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's correct.
Our topic of today would be about behavior change, as I understand. So I'm really curious what you have for me and for our audience to cover.
Yeah, in general about behavior change. So, so I mean, when it comes to us trying to do anything that's different in our lives, we need to think about where the current habits come from and where our opportunity is to mold new habits. Because if you think of your behavior, it exists at two different levels. It's either your conscious behavior, so something that you are voluntarily, consciously thinking about doing, or your subconscious behavior, things that are happening without your awareness or consciousness.
Yeah.
And typically 90% of our behavior is done at the level of our unconscious. So that's the opportunity here.
Yeah. And what is this, what is happening now with us? This is what kind of behavior?
That we're doing right now?
Yeah.
So a combination of everything. So like right now we are consciously coming upon different words that we want to share and like basically communicating, but then unconsciously we are doing all of the processes that keep us alive and sustained, we probably have certain predispositions for interacting with each other when it comes to like just the banter that's going back and forth. We just have learned certain beliefs about the way that we want to do that we're most comfortable. So we're doing that without even thinking about it. You know, like even the tone of voice and inflection that we use, that's all because it's comfortable for us because we've had positive results using it in the past. So we don't have to think about how we do that. It just happens unconsciously. So there's, and that's kind of behavior. So it's behavior is like this, like behavior in terms of the things that you actually do and like the actions you take, but also the way that you do things is part of your behavior too. And both of those elements are either conscious or unconscious.
Yeah, maybe in my case, in terms of communication, considering that English is not my native language, uh, for me, it's not 100% conscious because I need to think about what I and how I want to communicate, especially if I compare my communication with yours, because you are talking the same way in terms of speed and tone, like me, for example, in my native language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I speak some Spanish, so it's the same thing where it requires so much more energy to try and speak because it's not something that's comfortable. So when you talk about the difference between conscious and unconscious behavior, a conscious behavior is something that you need to think about because it's not your natural state. And that's why another language would be a conscious behavior because it's not natural to do. But then if you're speaking in your normal language, it's much more easy. It's much easier to do. And that's why it involves more unconscious processes. So it just relates to how comfortable you are doing that behavior. And if you're comfortable, then it's likely happening because it's happening unconsciously.
Yeah, and there are some skill sets which you can develop, and there are some skill sets you will never ever reach the top level. I'm
Of course.
considering, for example, let's take an example from the sports, from professional athletes. There are when you are at your younger age, for example, specialists or professionals or doctors can predict you that you can achieve top level results, for example, in swimming or not. And you have to live with that because, that's why there are so few really highly skilled talents, even in the business field, for example. There was only on Mozart and on Beethoven, but these kind of things, I think, in my opinion, you need to born to be someone like that. You can develop some skills, but there are skills in which you will never reach top level results, and this is something important, especially also in the business field, so that you can realize at an early stage that you can achieve high results or not.
Point on that. So, in terms of like skill development. So, I just finished reading the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. And one of the theories that she has is like, how do you get to a position of like really high performance and achievement, basically? And it relates to like talent acquisition, basically. So, first is you have a certain talent, right? So, it's something that you're born with, just like you were talking about. Not everyone can be a good swimmer. So, you have a certain talent. Then you apply effort to that talent and it becomes a skill that you have. So now you can apply that talent in a very specific way. But then once you have that skill, you apply effort again redundantly over and over. And then that is how you basically create results in your life and start achieving the things that you want. So it all starts, effort basically is the requirement on both ends of the equation there.
I fully agree. And there is also another book, I cannot recall the title. It was written by a Hungarian specialist in the field of networking studies, and he's working actually in the US now, in Boston. And it is proven that in order to achieve highly skilled talent or whatever in any field, on average, it takes around 10 to 15 years. Mm-hmm. For example, someone who wins the Olympic Games, it's very rare to see someone, an athlete, who started that sports game, whatever we call, in 2-3 years.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean that relates back to another book by Anders Ericsson where he talks about deliberate practice. So if you know like the 10,000 hour rule or something like that, that's kind of put into question by this idea of deliberate practice, which has certain criteria for skill development. So it's not just easy enough to do something over and over again, but you have to challenge yourself. You have to be getting feedback. You have to have a coach that tells you how to improve your performance. You know, so like there are different
from someone.
Yep. So there's different ways that you can incorporate some of these elements in order to be more successful. And that's why I love these books, is because like you can accelerate your learning curve in terms of how you develop as an individual and acquire skills that you want in order to be successful and effective in your own ways. So it's, I love that reference.
Okay. How about anything about the behavior change? Because you mentioned something about the 3 steps.
Yep. Yeah, let's get into the three step formula to behavior change. And this is something that I have kind of consolidated on my own. It's been elements have been taken from people like Darren Hardy and the Compound Effect, James Clear with Atomic Habits, Nir Eyal with Indistractable. It's kind of like even Mel Robbins and some of her like 5-second rule and like if then planning stuff. So like a lot of this has kind of been consolidated into one. And then one other kind of transformative influencer in this, his name is Jim Fortin. He's a subconscious transformation expert. So basically,
and it comes back to experts, as I see.
Because I enjoy their work. So I consume it and I try and integrate it as best as possible. So the 3-step process, and I'm just going to talk about what those 3 steps are, and then I'll get into detail for each one. So the first step is identity. So we talked about identity, right? And how our identity, perfect. So first step is identity, and that's like the person that we are. Then the second step is your behavior. So what are you actually doing? What actions are you taking? And then the third step is systems. So how can you design your life and environment in a certain way to produce certain results? Okay. So you got to start at the very beginning to understand this. So when it comes to your identity, basically your identity is your belief system. It's what you have grown up knowing the world to be like. It's the way that you're comfortable interacting with the things that are around you in the world. The reason that it's important to gain an awareness on what your identity is because of that subconscious process we were talking about previously. If you hold a certain identity, then you are predispositioned to act in a way that's in alignment with that identity. There's this thing called cognitive dissonance in the brain. And what that means is if you think one thing and do another, your brain rejects it. It doesn't like it. It's like, wait, there's no alignment between these two thoughts. So you, for that very reason, to avoid cognitive dissonance, take action in a way that is in alignment with the identity that you hold. An example of an identity you can hold is in a very simple switch in terms of like how we can actually create change. So someone who smokes cigarettes and they want to quit, right? They want to quit smoking cigarettes. You can approach that relationship in 2 different ways. You can say, oh, I'm like if you're out for like a drink and someone offers you a cigarette, you don't want to smoke. Someone could say, hey, do you want a cigarette? And you could say, oh, no, thanks. I'm not smoking tonight, which is the identity of I'm still someone who smokes, but I'm trying to quit. I'm trying to do something differently. So you still have that identity reflected in the expression that you use. Or you could respond by saying, no, I don't smoke. And that identity then is a much stronger affirmation of this is who I want to be. This is my intention. And that opens the door for someone else to follow up and say, hey, do you want to, like, are you sure you don't want to smoke? You're not smoking tonight? Or I don't smoke. It's like, okay, case done. You know, there's no further explanation required for that. So that's kind of first, like understanding how identities can be different in order to be more aligned with the life that you want to live. Okay. And what we need to understand.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. This is similar to learning, for example, saying no to something. For example, on offer from a client or something like that, to learn saying no, because you already know that that's something you don't really want.
Correct. Yeah. No, that is an identity that you can hold.
It's hard to learn for many of us to say no for something, but this is something which is similar. Yeah,
it's related for sure. Yeah, it's related in I think deep rooted ways when it comes to like identities of like, oh, I need to be accepted, I need to be validated by others. So by saying no, that would create the cognitive dissonance of like, oh man, like they're going to be upset with me. That's not who I want to be. That's not how I want to be. And then that your behavior adjusts. So that's identity, right? That's the beginning.
Okay.
And then in terms of actually thinking about the expression of your identity, like I said, there's this subconscious process of your identity becomes your behaviors, because that is just it's basically the path that your brain and body are most comfortable taking is, oh, I believe this thing, so I do this thing. So that is when we have certain subconscious habits. And a lot of those subconscious habits, when it comes to behavior change, if we're trying to uproot those habits, then these are negative things that happen in our life. You know, like someone who snoozes a lot. Let's say that you wake up in the morning, you want to get up and go for a workout, your alarm goes off and you snooze. You know, like that's because your identity is, oh man, it's okay. It's not that important that I get up right now. I'll figure it out. Like there's that kind of complacency within your identity, and that can be adjusted. Yeah. But the opportunity here is a two-way street. So like I said, with cognitive dissonance, you have a certain belief, which is your identity, and then that leads you to do a certain action. But those two things are aligned because they're within the same thread. What happens though, if you get conscious with your activity, so it's no longer the unconscious behavior, now you start introducing a conscious behavior, something that you're choosing to do that is different, that you have this awareness of, that requires a little bit more effort, a little bit more discipline, then something really cool happens. So you have your previous identity, which creates that unconscious behavior. Now, if you choose to do a different behavior, you then are seeding a new identity, because this identity, because this new behavior, this conscious behavior creates that conflict between the old identity. So your brain's trying to figure out, okay, who am I? If I'm doing this thing, then what does that mean about me? And if you do that new behavior consciously time and time and time and time and time again, then you start teaching yourself that, oh, I'm not the person that had that original identity. I'm the person that has this new identity. And that's how this feedback loop works, is there's a relationship between the behaviors that you do and the identities that you hold. If you want to hold a new identity, then you've got to do a new behavior. And that's where conscious action comes into place, right? Yeah. So that's the opportunity. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the key term, that it's adjustable. Mm-hmm. It's important to,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much research going on about neuroplasticity and how we can literally rewire our brain to groove into different patterns. And that process is based on the assimilation of your brain trying to rationalize all the things that are happening through your environment, right? Your brain is just a meaning-making machine. So if you give it another reason to find meaning, it's going to develop in a way that actually kind of pulls the value out of that. So
consciously or unconsciously, I'm actually doing this at this moment because I am starting this video podcast, and I am only at the beginning. I am doing it not in my native language, and this I feel that it takes some more effort than something which is usually more common for me on a daily basis. So
let's use that example because what you're doing, and I think we're doing this every moment of every day, where we do certain things and then our brain figures out, is that in alignment? Is there dissonance between these two things? But what you're doing is, and we can go into the next step of systems too, and kind of how you've been able to do this, but you have a certain identity, which is you want to be a professional. You want to be a professional that is very fluent and effective in English, which is why your behavior is you're having this podcast in English, which is uncomfortable. It creates that dissonance between the identity you hold, which is, I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to put myself out there. And like, what happens if there's that fear in there, which is your old identity, but you have chosen to do a different behavior consciously, which is to speak in English. So now you have this new identity that you're cultivating every single time you have one of these conversations, which is, I'm a professional that can operate successfully in English, and so that's part of the process. You're doing it right now. So that's a great example.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And number three,
Number three is systems. So when it comes to taking conscious action, so the specific thing that you want to do that is fueling a new identity, when it comes to doing that thing, you need to do it as consistently, reliably, and effectively as possible. And what happens in life is we are very emotional people. We're very emotional. very kind of, and for a good reason too. Like evolutionarily, that was required for us to be able to basically take amplified and intense actions in response to our surroundings. That's kind of the fight or flight mechanism is reliant on emotions. So it is part of our evolutionary history, but it's no longer in practice and application like it needs to be. But so what happens is if we have a certain behavior that we want to do and our mind and emotion starts kind of making up reasons why we shouldn't do it, and these are the typical things is, let's say your motivation runs out, you don't feel motivated to do it. If you don't have the willpower to get yourself to do it, if you don't feel disciplined enough to get it done, then you might not take that action that is important in order to create that new identity. But what you can do is you can create systems around that specific action so that you take that action reliably, consistently, effectively every single time, so that you're doing that action, which can then seed that new identity, because behavior change exists at the level of your identity. So we're kind of walking our way back in terms of what can we do today that will help us create the change we want in our identity. And ultimately, that identity creates the behavior change because of that unconscious pathway. So when I talk about systems, a few things that you can do that we all know and love, we just never labeled them as systems, is accountability. So if you don't feel like doing something and someone's holding you accountable, you're more likely to do it. So that's something that you can design into your life that reminds you of your intention to do a certain behavior. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is like habit optimizations. So how can you implement certain things in your environment? Like, when you talk about the habit loop with James Clear, the behavior first requires a trigger. So if you want to wake up at 5 a.m. to work out, like I said, maybe you set your alarm and the title of your alarm says like, don't snooze, wake up, this is best for you. Then you bring that moment of awareness into your environment so that you know what action you wanted to take. So that's how you can use a habit optimization. Or you can talk about like tracking and measurement tools, which is also a system. So you can only know if your behavior is actually changing if you measure it over time. So how can you implement specific ways to know, did I do this thing? Yes or no? Check the box, check the box, check the box. And then you can see if you're compliant with that behavior. And then another one that I love is called contingency planning. So it's having a plan for when things don't go according to plan. And basically it's like, if I don't feel like doing it, then what do I do? Or if, I'm trying to read a book, but I don't have a book, then what do I do? And now you start having a plan in place for when life inevitably happens and you can't do the behavior like you want to. Instead of getting off track and losing sight of being consistent with that action that you want to take, that behavior that you're taking consistently, now you have a way to reroute yourself if you start getting off track so that you can get back to where you need to be, so you can continue to take action to be able to seed that and fuel that new identity that you're trying to cultivate. So that's the summary there is you want to make a change at the level of your behavior or at the level of your identity, because unconsciously that creates certain behaviors in your life. And then that behavior ends up fueling that identity and strengthens it even more. So we've got to get our identity first to then pick a specific behavior. In order to do that behavior as often as we want, we need to generate systems that allow us and nudge us to do that behavior as often, frequently, and reliably as we can, so that this process is actually happening at a sustainable level without requiring as much motivation, effort, willpower, and discipline.
And what about the accountability? Because you mentioned this. Do you find it important to have someone who takes accountability towards you, or be it yourself, or using some kind of tools? You mentioned something like measuring and ticking and whatever. But what's your opinion regarding to have someone who is for the accountability part?
No, I think it's a huge piece of it. And I think the most effective form, at least in my experience, is accountability from someone else, not necessarily your own accountability. And the reason being is because psychologically, there are two ways, like if you talk about like core drivers in life, there are two core drivers in life. It is pursuing pleasure or escaping fear, basically. So when it comes to accountability, and I should say fear and discomfort, like the fear of discomfort is kind of built into one. When it comes to accountability,
we can call this the uncomfortable zone, as we hear very often.
Sure. Yeah. So when it comes to accountability, what happens is you have a relationship with someone who is expecting a certain thing from you. So you've set a certain expectation. There is a standard that you need to meet, that you need to report to them that you have in fact met that standard.
Yeah.
So what happens when that moment comes around and you don't feel like doing something, but you know you have this accountability relationship in place, you know that you're going to have to tell them, hey, I didn't do it, right?
And
Like if you didn't, you have to tell them you didn't do it. And what that does is then that is activating your core motivation and driver of avoiding discomfort, because it's an uncomfortable situation of telling them that you didn't do something versus pursuing pleasure. And what I found, and what has been scientifically proven, is that we're actually more motivated to avoid discomfort than to seek pleasure. So using accountability as a way to create discomfort means that we can be more compliant with our behaviors, because we will so strongly try to avoid that moment of discomfort.
Yeah, and accountability from someone else is not about patting on your shoulder.
Yeah, correct.
Because that will not lead to any results.
Correct, because then there needs to be some kind of confrontation or consequence of you not doing it, because that creates the discomfort, and that's the core mechanism of accountability and how it works, is it creates this system of discomfort. And if you don't do what you're supposed to do, then you're going to have to answer to this discomfort. And that's motivating in itself, because we are so designed to avoid discomfort. So yeah, accountability is huge for that reason.
Yeah. Well, great, really great topic. I think that we learned something new from you. And I'm really curious how you can apply this in the business world. So maybe at another session of our video postcard, we can further discuss this topic. So thank you very much, Brian. And I think that would be all for today. I really honored that I got you on my session. Thank you very much, Brian, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thanks. You too. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye.
This episode was brought to you by Venture Mastery, one of the leading educational platforms for entrepreneurs aiming to grow and scale their businesses. Thanks for tuning in with me, your host, Phil Amery. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where we'll get you updated with our upcoming courses, one-to-one interviews, and latest entrepreneurial success stories from around the world. I'd be honored to hear your thoughts and feedback. So please leave your comments and help us in producing even more engaging and valuable content for our next episodes. Thanks for joining us.